Good evening, idlers. Thank you all very much indeed for coming along tonight to see our talk about philosophical issues with Mr. Michael Palin. It's really lovely to see so many of you here. There must be about 200. I only wish we had a similar sort of turnout for our classes on Latin grammar. And the history of English buildings and so on. We are trying to educate you know. So I'm going to slip in a bit of education into this evening's talk, so don't expect to be too entertained. Well, I won't keep talking now. I'll just introduce you to Michael Palin. And a lovely big round of applause, please.
Top man. Absolutely top man.
He's very kind man, very charming. Well, Michael, thanks so much for coming along to talk to our audience of idlers.
I was a bit worried about the philosophical side of it, but I'll do my best.
Well, I was thinking we could reframe this as a kind of careers advice talk.
Ah, yes. A bit late for me now.
No, you're advising them.
What?
You're advising them.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. You can, any day.
I'll try and not talk too much, because you've probably come mainly to see Michael Palin. So I'll keep my questions as quick as possible. But I would just like to say very quickly, by way of introduction, that I interviewed Michael, I suppose, about 9 or 10 years ago for the Idler magazine. And the sort of spur for that, if you like, was that Michael had done a show called 30 Years Without a Proper Job. And so I was fascinated to think through this idea, because the point really of the Idler is to find a path through life which is a free, autonomous path, and perhaps avoid conventional work altogether. So clearly when someone's done that so successfully and with such apparent ease, you want to meet them and try and sort of find out what's going on. And we want to try and talk about some of these ideas this evening. But that was 30 years without a proper job. How many years is it now?
About 48, I think. It was, you know, someone asked me if I was give a title to a talk, and I thought, well, what sums up my life? And it's very difficult, because I've done lots of different things, for which I'm eternally grateful. And I think the fact is that I've been continually indecisive and never been actually required to take significant decisions affecting large periods of my life, as people do. Some people have to go in and they've got to say, for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I'm going to be doing this. I've never done anything more than about the next 2 years, maximum, when I've signed a contract. I've never been under contract to anyone for longer than that. And I regard that as not having a proper job. And I felt, well, it kind of reflects my own attitude, which is that's rather a good thing, to not have a proper job. I mean, it may be slightly flaneurish to wander about saying, oh, I don't have a proper job, but it also means that your mind's open. You're still aware that there are lots of other things you could possibly do, and that you acknowledge the doubt that you have about the things you're doing anyway. And the latest volume of diaries, which is coming out in September, October, which deals with 1988 to 1998, is just this crazed man around middle age, you know, just turned 50, suddenly wanting to try and do everything, you know, a novel, a West End play, and all that sort of thing. But it was liberating, and I thought a kind of idlerish attitude.
Where does that attitude come from? Do you think you were born with it? Did it develop at school? Did you have free-thinking parents, or was it a kind of reaction against the possibility of becoming a lawyer or something like that?
There was never any possibility of me becoming a lawyer. I just didn't have those particular talents. I'm not particularly good with numbers. I'm not particularly good with sort of debates and all that sort of thing. What I can do, and what I always was able to do, was to enjoy and make people laugh, or at least sort of be with people who laughed a lot. I liked that. That's what I did at school. You know, I was a mischievous boy, but quite, you know, I was quite sort of, you know, I didn't sort of cause a lot of trouble. I wasn't a revolutionary or anything like that. But I was definitely sort of what I would do at school. I remember when I was at my prep school in Sheffield, in 1953 it was, because it was the coronation. And during the milk break, at a certain time of the year, I did a little sort of show for people, which was all about the coronation and the coronation ceremony. And, it's embarrassing, really, but it was sort of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Not at all.
The Duke of Edinburgh being caught short and having toilet paper out of his inside pocket. Just awful things like that. But they all loved it, because it was just sort of something fresh and silly and different. And so I could improvise, but I think there was always the feeling that I saw the world out there, and the absurdity of the world always seemed to come out to me with extraordinary clarity. I could see the masters talking, and I loved some of my teachers. They were excellent. Others were complete bullshitters, and I could see it. I could see what they were doing, coming there. Okay, read around the class, Napoleonic Wars. And I could do that instantly. After they were gone, I would do, read around the class, Napoleonic Wars. And everyone would say, Palin's very clever, he's noted that. So I think there's a certain sort of restlessness there.
Yeah. What you're talking about sounds like a kind of almost Buddhist detachment from the world. I mean, it was sort of built into you. I mean, people go and meditate on the top of a mountain for 30 years to try and to reach this state that you clearly had at 8.
No, I was not at all cut off from the world. I needed the world around me. It's a bit like the one of my favourite Monty Python sketches, which doesn't get played very often, but it was the hermits who all live together up on a hill. Are you a hermit? Yes, we're a new hermit. Have you just moved in? Yes, we're just down there. You must come round. We've got a little study group at 11 o'clock, and then we meet in the evening, and we all have a drink. Oh, that's very nice. So these are the hermits. They've been here for 12 years. So even the hermits, but it's like detachment is something which I would have made fun of.
Yeah, well, what do hermits do on their day off, kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
So have you ever studied any Eastern religion? I mean, clearly you've been around the world.
I've been around a bit.
Yeah.
I've been around, yeah.
Have you ever practiced anything like mindfulness meditation or any kind of...
I've never really had the concentration to follow that through. I can see it and understand it, and there's a great deal in Buddhism that I think is an eminently sensible and reasonable and good sort of pathway in life. But I've never gone the whole hog. I've realised that I am what I am, which is probably someone who plucks a little bit here, a little bit there. And so, I wouldn't say I've ever... And this may be part of why I've done so many things, is that I'm actually not terribly good at intense concentration on philosophical issues.
Well, I'm sorry to invite you here tonight to do precisely that.
I know. So I'll go now if you want.
So what was George Harrison like then to move on to a bit of celebrity gossip?
Oh, George was a philosopher. George was very philosophical. And he did, of course, as you know, very, very interested in the Hindu religion and the Indian way of life and the Bhagavad Gita and all that sort of thing. And George would bend your ear for quite some considerable time about the meaning of life and afterlife. What does it mean, Michael? It doesn't mean anything. It's what happens after that means something. And of course, actually, although I may laugh, apparently it really helped him and the family when he was dying. He just said, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to another state of being, we all end at a certain place, but we don't end forever, we go on. And he sort of made that seem very attractive, and I think it helped him.
See, normally when you meet people who are really very successful, there's a kind of restlessness or a kind of lack of something that they're trying to make up for. And usually a sort of colossal ego, but these aspects of the successful person seem to be kind of absent from you. Is that true, or are you just
yes,
are you just hiding them? You're hiding them very well. Do you wake up in the middle of the night and sort of worry about things?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, doubt is very, very important. I think everything you do, everything. And interesting, because with all the Python reunion happening, and there's a lot of talk about Python, and a lot of it is getting to the very silly stage of saying, the greatest comedy group ever, gracing our capital for 10 shows, and this is going to be unbeatable, the best thing. People just go on, and this is it hagiographical or hagiographical? Hagiographical.
I think haggy. Anyone, any grammarians in the audience?
Anyway, it's a little bit over the top. And I think suddenly, God, this is not what Python's about. Python was actually about not taking things seriously, about questioning everything. And suddenly, if you're not very careful, people want you to be the establishment. They want you to be the messenger and all that. I think that's a thing you've got to be very, very careful of. And remember where we all started. Where I started at school, I suppose, with little mischievous jokes at the back of the class. Python was a sort of embodiment of that. What kept Python together was a view of the world as essentially a rather absurd place where people do very silly things. And so one's got to sort of remember that that's what keeps you going. And that's all to do with acknowledging doubt all the time. I never, if I went home and started playing the star, that would be the end. My family bring me firmly down to earth, my wife especially, which is excellent. So it does mean that everything I do, I think, even coming here tonight, here I am. What right have I to sit and talk to all you people that probably all got stories to tell? You've probably all got things you'd come and sit here and talk about. And I'm the one who's there. So you deal with that by saying, well, you're here because you know my work, and I've had a chance to show the work, and maybe that's brought you here. But me, myself, now, as being an authority on anything, I think is extremely wobbly grounds. So I'm sorry, you can go now if you want. I'm just expressing my doubt in an idlerish way.
Could I ask you about the creative process with something like Python, and in fact, all the things you've been involved with? As you said, Python was very much about attacking the established systems of church and state and so on, and satirising them. Would you sit around and say, okay, we're going to satirize church and state today? Did you kind of agree on a political angle, or is it just, do you just sit in a room and make each other laugh and write it down and see what happens?
The latter. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we'd ever take it serious enough to say this is going to be our target, or the church have had it a bit easier for a while, or the military, we'll show them a thing or two. We were just jumped up little comedians being paid very little money to do a BBC show that was put out late on a Saturday night and taken off when Horse of the Year show overran. That's what we were doing. Now people look back and say, my God, this is Python. We were like the sort of Rembrandts of comedy or whatever, I don't know. Of course, we weren't at the time, and we considered ourselves to be just very small fry doing a show which we were allowed to create ourselves, and that's a very, very important thing. Part of the reason for going, part of the advantage of being going out late at night on a Saturday and being taken off the Horse of the Year show was that the BBC didn't bother us at all. And I think now we would be very, very lucky to get a series of 13 shows without having to present a synopsis of what we were going to do, a detailed analysis of what the shows were going to do, how we were going to do it, all that sort of thing.
What's the demographic for this show? That kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Words like that. Yeah.
You didn't actually understand what I meant, did you?
God, no, oh dear. You just made me realise I haven't voted today. And I usually vote. I vote demographic. I'm going to vote demographic.
You were going to vote UKIP, presumably.
Well, no, I quite like Europe. I am absolutely a fan of Europe. I would vote, I'd probably vote for the Spanish Liberal Party. I'm so keen on Europe. So Nigel Farage, who I do like, as I think is a wonderful character and has entertained us amazingly, but I just don't like... Can I have a little rant?
I beg your pardon?
Can I have a little rant?
Yeah, absolutely. Rant away. This is a ranting area.
No, I mean, I don't want to get all political, but just the one thing that seems to be left out of the debate, and I know this because I've done a series in Europe. You look at the history of Europe over the last century, it's hideous infighting. Lots of people have lost their lives. It's been cruel, it's been vicious, it's been full of racial hatred. And since the end of the Second World War, because of the efforts of the European Commission, the European Common Market is a sort of... adjunct of that. But Europe has held together, and there's not been all the pain and all the agony and all the ferocious hatreds of the past. And I think, you sort of say, oh, well, we don't like the European Union. I don't like it in lots of aspects, the way money's wasted and all that sort of thing. But you have to see that it's kept the peace in Europe, and it's kept countries, away from each other's throats. And I just think that people don't kind of realise that. They just talk about our country and, what it means to us. Well, a lot of other things mean something to us. It's us in relation to the rest of the world. It's quite important. End of rant.
Thank you. The Python movies, they must have been a strain because you were working with small budgets. Was it much more difficult to make a film than to make the TV shows?
Well, no, the TV shows were quite demanding. We were doing 13 shows in a sort of 7-month period. That was writing and performing and doing all that. So actually, with the TV shows, we were very often strapped for good material. And I recently got terrible panning from people for saying that Son of Python was crap. And people really said, how dare Michael Palin say that? And I said, well, I dare, because I wrote the stuff. Yeah, it's my own bloody material. Thank you very much. But the difference with the film were that we actually, we were in control of the films. We had our own director. We were putting it all together ourselves. The budget was very, very small. I mean, the Holy Grail was made for just over £200,000 altogether. And I would say, yes, there was some strain in the making of the film, but we felt it was all working to the right goal. This was something we really wanted to do. We'd planned it. We'd got the best sketches we could together. It wasn't like the 13 shows, weekly shows turnover. We actually had some time to think. And Life of Brian actually was quite well funded, thanks to Dear George, who put in £5 million just because he wanted to see the film. That was almost comfortable. But there was something about the films which we enjoyed because I think we had more control and we'd put them together ourselves.
And they were commercially successful, obviously.
They were in the end. I mean,
Yeah.
Holy Grail we weren't sure about. We had some screenings of it very early on, and people walked out. And these were the investors.
But I remember at the time, people were shocked. They were shocked by the final scene on the crosses and so on. Even my parents.
Life of Brian, yes.
Yeah, Life of Brian.
Yeah.
But in Life of Brian, and even my parents, who would consider themselves to be, kind of 70s, 80s bohemians, I remember them saying, I was actually quite shocked. But people wouldn't find it shocking today.
I don't know. There are probably still some people who would. Most of America still seem to find it shocking. It doesn't really get many plays there, The Life of Brian. But yes, it was shocking. But I think in quite a good way, that's all I'd say. Because people tended to have a knee-jerk reaction to Brian and say, well, they're just mocking Christianity, they're mocking faith, they're mocking the story of Jesus, which actually was not what we were doing, which is why we deliberately put in a character who was Jesus, separate from Brian, in the stables at the beginning, and then the Sermon on the Mount. So Brian wasn't Jesus, actually physically wasn't in the film and all that. But it was pretty close to the bone, because what we were doing, our premise was we'd researched what was happening in Judea at that time. And there was Messiah fever, for a start. Everybody was looking for the next Messiah that I heard it was about. So the idea of, oh, you're Brian, and he just says one thing, you're the Messiah, that seemed a nice basis for comedy. And also, I mean, even dealing with the crucifixion, it's very significant in people's religious belief, but historically it happened day in, day out, on a regular basis in Judea at that time. That's just the way you got rid of criminals. So it wasn't like there was one crucifixion ever, and that was Jesus. Which is why one of my favourite characters in Python is in Life of Brian, is the Roman officer who has to send people off to collect their crosses, one cross each on the left, one cross each and all that. Because you play him not as a sort of, it's not just for a joke, there's actually character there. there's this tortured liberal who's been brought up in a very nice family, probably like your own, living just outside Rome, slightly bohemian, and he's sent out to Judea, this god-awful place where it's terribly hot and they're all at each other's throats, and he has to send them to be crucified. He doesn't believe in this sort of thing, but, so when Eric comes along and says, no, it's all right, I've been told I'm going to go and live on a desert island. And he genuinely says that, oh, that's terrific. Oh. And then Eric says, no, it's crucifixion, really. My favourite little exchange in the film.
I mean, obviously we can't know, but it's probably a lot more realistic than some of the other Christ movies because they don't have any humour or
well, there wasn't much
realism.
competition, There were always people with incredibly even teeth, and Jesus was always played by somebody from Northern California. The best ones were the, what was it, Pasolini. Did an amazing crucifix. I think it was Gospel according to St. Matthew, was it? Anyway, fantastic, brilliant. But there you go. Anyway.
Can I ask
Not funny.
Can I ask your views on a really contentious issue? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's just fine. Should grammar be taught in schools?
Grammar.
Oh, English grammar.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had this issue where sorry to talk about myself here. I know you're more interested in Michael, just for one tiny second.
That's okay.
We set up a thing called the Bad Grammar Award, and we awarded the prize for a company or a politician who'd used the worst grammar, and we were attacked as being part of some kind of go-bite conspiracy. So the following year, we got some Guardianista people on the panel, and we were still attacked as being part of some kind of right-wing conspiracy for saying that children should be taught where to put the apostrophe and so on. What is your view on this?
Well, I'm very traditional in a way. I just think it's a matter of making your point clearly and being able to say what you want to say or write what you want to say in a way that can be understood. So sometimes a comma is very, very important. And I know, well, as a writer of comedy, pauses, little pauses, very, very important. It means what you want to say. Just a whole run of words doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I do like to have prepositions not hanging in the end, but, in the middle, and I don't like split infinitives that much.
You fascist.
So, but things have all changed. I'm so fully aware that the way people use words and communication now with, the internet, it's all utterly changed, and speed seems to be the main thing, and also informality. And I feel, well, maybe I'm being a crusty old person saying, we should have higher, upper and lower case words and all that sort of thing. People say, why? Why do you need that? Just say what you're going to say. All I would say here, and this is contentious, is that how you write it is how you say it and how you think it too. And if you're just a blur and just don't want to do this because can't think of anything else, that seems to me a bit of a waste of your brain. And it's not really putting anything across. And
perhaps discourteous too. I mean, to put some effort into your written communication and spoken communication shows courtesy to the other person who's going to be reading it.
It depends who the other person is, really. But yes, I know. I mean, in all my travels around the world, I do realise that there's so many different ways of communication, and I've talked to people whose language I don't know at all, and we somehow get on via gesture and all that. So, what I think is most important is that you talk to somebody or you express something which means something and is some communication between you and the other person. If it's just a way of using language to, sort of block the communication, or make it too formal, then I think you're missing something out. The main thing is just to get people to express themselves clearly and relate to you in some shape or form. Yeah, I think that's important.
When you've
banal, isn't it?
You talk about your own career as a kind of accidental flow, in a sense. Things come along and you say yes or no. I mean,
yeah.
Has there ever been any sort of plan? Have you thought, well, okay, I'm going to do some creative visualization. I'm going to read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Tovey. I'm going to do my kind of strengths and weaknesses quadrant and this sort of thing, and plan to be here in 5 years. Clearly not, no.
No, I never think like that. I really have been extraordinarily lucky that I've never been pinned down and then someone said, what do you want to do? I've never been able to answer that. I mean, my father felt that I should be able to say, I'm going to do this. He said, what are you going to do? I said, what do you mean? What are you going to do? Meaning when you grow up. I said, well, I'm not sure yet. You've got to think of something. So, I went to the school, the school careers master like we all did. And he was obviously, what I was fascinated by was the actual character of the careers master rather than what he was saying. And he was obviously, a man called Arnold Ellis, and he clearly he'd been stuck with this rotten job of the careers master. And he would talk to you, say, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in sort of deep sea diving. Oh, Palin, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in theology. Oh, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in painting. I'm interested in banking, whatever. And he would say, well, I think the best thing for you is to go and have an interview for Pilkington's Glass. And he would open this drawer, and he had all these little brochures from Pilkington's. And he would give everybody, despite what their particular talents were, a little brochure about Pilkington's Glass. He was obviously, this was his con. And I'm just saying this because this is what interests me, not the whole business of careers. I was fascinated by Arnold Ellis and the position he was in. This made me think, God, this is interesting. Is he on a retainer from Pilkington's? What's the thing about Pilkington? He's nothing to do with Pilkington.
Did it work? Did your school friends end up at Pilkington?
We did. All of us ran Pilkington for quite a considerable time. I don't know of any of my friends who went to Pilkington's, but again, I've not actually had to be pinned down and say, what do you want to do? And even when people ask me now, well, I do a bit of writing, okay, I do a bit of comedy, I do a bit of acting, but still, it's still just the career path, if there is one, is essentially blown by the wind. So I will do something, because I work quite hard, and I will do something, and that will usually start a string of events, which leads me on to something else. Or else it'll just be ignored and we'll never do that again. But usually there's something you do, and especially if it's a team effort that you're doing it, someone will say, oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Because there's something in what you've done which is essentially interesting, which someone will pick out. And that's the way I've been very fortunate to live and have my career, in doing things which people sort of say, oh, well, he can do this, he can do that. The way the travel, my sort of travels began, was entirely through this process. I was writing Time Bandits with Terry Gilliam in 1980, and we had a deal with a Hollywood studio, and there was a Hollywood producer, and halfway through the writing process, I got asked by BBC producer if I'd like to present a railway documentary. There was a series of railway documentaries around the world, and I thought this sounded great, so I said, yes, sure. And then the next morning rang me up and said, most of them have been taken, there's only one left, and that's London to Crewe. So, but I did it. The long and short is I did it, and this producer, this Hollywood producer, what are you doing, Aren't we paying you enough or not? Why do you go off and do this? And I was only getting £1,500 for 3.5 weeks filming, plus a book. And he said, well, if you're going to do it, I'm going to make sure you get paid at least enough for this. So who's in charge? I said, well, it's a lady called Betty. I can't read the second name. She's in BBC contracts. Anyway, and a week later, I've never seen this producer sort of so ashen-faced. And they said, I've talked to Betty. And I said, well, what? We discussed your fee. And I said, well, what have you got it up to? He said, £1,500. And he just could not believe that he'd been outdone by this Betty who would not move on a single pound. But long and short, so I did that documentary against, everyone thought I was completely balmy, and I did it. And about 8 years later, someone looking for a presenter for Around the World in 80 Days saw this railway documentary and said, Michael Palin, he can do serious documentaries as well as sending them up. maybe we should ask him to do Around the World in 80 Days. So that's the way things have gone. Rather than me sit down and say, here is my game plan. It requires you to be very open, and you've got to have a lot of friends and people you trust. It's really important.
Could you tell when you were being offered that show that could be something really, really good?
Yes, I think I did. I wouldn't have taken it on. I was in the diaries that come out, the 1988 to 98 diaries. They start. I found a little private diary that has never been published before. It's not been in the book of Around the World in 80 Days, and it was just covered the first few days of Around the World in 80 Days, and I was terrified. I was on this boat. We were going across the Mediterranean. There was no script. There was, at least 80 days stretching ahead of us. It all depended on me encountering people and talking to people, and I'd never done this sort of thing before. The BBC invested money in it. I thought, why am I doing this? But there must have been something when it was first mentioned that made me feel this is going to bring something out of me that I know will sort of work in a certain sense. And almost everything I've ever done, even though I'm nervous as hell before I do them, and even while I'm doing them, I realize that in most cases I'm doing them because there's something in me which I know can make it work and make it work my way. And if you see, that's not too immodest, but that's just the way it is. I've rarely done anything where I think I should never have started that in the first place. Everything I've done, even things that have not been successful, I've learned something from, and I'm very glad that I've taken them on, and that's quite unusual.
Tell us about some of those.
Well,
the unsuccessful ones.
I can't think of any now. Well, no, I mean, there are, all right, it's in the diaries, lots of them. There's a television series called Palin's Column, and the reason I did this, and this is a very interesting thing, because I had a friend who was very interested in the politics of television, all that sort of thing. And the licenses were being reapportioned in 1992 or something like that. And he said, Michael, we're going to go for a new license for the Southern Television region. Would you be on board? Help us out. We want quality television. We want good programs. We want good documentaries. We want the best, not the sort of stuff that they've had before. And I thought, well, that's good. Yes, I'll join it. And then I got more and more political. And in the end, I was on the board and had to sit through these tedious board meetings where it was all about sort of finance and all that sort of thing. And I said, well, I didn't really want to do all this. They said, well, no, the best thing you can do is to do a series for us. I said, well, I haven't got much time. Anyway, long and short of it was, we got together this series for Meridian Television, where I would go to the Isle of Wight. And it was quite a good idea, and it was called Palin's Column because I would be taken on by the local newspaper to do things during the week which would be filmed, and then I would write a column. You'd see me writing it, then I would go to the editor, and he would look it through and say, Michael, well, this is interesting, that's not interesting, blah, 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 and that would be the editor. So it was a week's program ending with me writing the column, which would be approved by this guy. Anyway, it just didn't really work. Partly because the editor was, I hope he's not here, rather a dull man, and...
He went mad?
No, rather a dull man.
Oh, dull.
No. He would never go mad. You know, he's the sort of person who would never go mad. That's how dull he was. I like someone who can go mad. Woo! Good. Yeah, on the way. No, you're putting it on a bit now. But anyway, so he was a bit dull. So when we came to the bit with the column, he would just say, oh, Michael, yes, that's good. And the director would say, come on, say something. And also, just some of the things we did were not quite up to scratch. You know, taking part in conquer competitions and things like that. And it just wasn't great. There were some memorable things in it. The closing titles, particularly. But there we are. But the problem with that, and I'm just talking about it now, I can see that, was because actually I did it as part of a deal for a situation I was not happy with, which is me being a board member for a company. I was happy that they got the license, then it was up to them to make what they wanted. And so, you know, the motivation was kind of wrong. Another one, which comes up in the diaries, is my play, The Weekend, which I did quite like, and I thought there was some very good stuff in that. And we got Richard Wilson to do it, and it was put on in the West End. And it was really slated. We had a horrible first night, everything went wrong. And the reviews were really sort of horrible, absolutely horrible.
Really? Did you have a thick skin about it, or did you find them upsetting?
No, of course I don't have a thick skin. You know, when someone says, this is the worst load of stuff, you know, thank God for Richard Wilson, he's made this tired old rubbish work. You know, people say things like that.
And those phrases are burned into the back of your mind, presumably.
Well, they are, unfortunately, in a little bit of a way. And it's rather interesting. Again, an observation of the world. I've met some of these people, these critics, and they are the most creepy people. They come up, oh, what are you doing next? All that, that's jolly good. Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Yeah. Have you read that thing? Do you remember you didn't like that much? Oh, oh God, did I say something awful? Yes, you did, you little shit. Of course, I never say that, because I'm far too nice.
No.
I say, oh, no, really nice, thank you very much. No, I mean, that's beside the point. It was,
I could see a good sketch, The Critics. Python sketch, the critics together, like the Hermits or something.
Yes, well, we've done critics. We've done critics a bit, but we're probably getting their own back. And no, I mean, that's actually a side issue. The fact was, it wasn't as successful as I hoped it would be, and I wanted it to be. And so I had to think about that, and I think about, well, was it badly written? What went wrong with it? And I learned from the things that were wrong, and there were bits in it that could have been written better, but also things in the casting that weren't quite right. And the good thing is that it played in this great theatre called the Strand, it was called then. It was about 1,500 people in or something like that. And it just wasn't right for that big theatre. A small place would have been fine, because it's quite an intimate thing about a marriage, sort of old married couple going to each other. And you know, the people who came to see it were tour groups of ladies from the Midlands who wanted to see Des O'Connor, basically. Or they wanted to see Richard Wilson doing One Foot in the Grave, and that didn't help. But the fact is that, unlike Palin's column, which I was doing for the wrong reasons, I was doing this for the right reasons, because I wanted to write it. And it still does very, very well in amateur Amdram companies, love it. So people were saying to me, oh, you know, we're putting on the Weekend in Scunthorpe, you know, and I think, great, good for you.
So it's had a lovely life in a way.
Yes, it still goes on, yeah.
Well, I've been reading the diaries, and they're all a terrific read, and you're a great writer. How do you find the time to work, and could you give us some kind of insight into, you know, a working day? Let's say there's a year when you've got to get down and write a novel or a book that you've set yourself. How many hours a day will you work? What time do you get up? Do you have any sort of a routine?
I'm quite disciplined, and I do have a routine. I'm not able to get up at 5 in the morning like some people are able to do and do 3 hours work. I'm sure it'd be a good idea, but my wife would probably divorce me, you know. Not that she's particularly keen to have me in bed for an extra 3 hours. It's just, you know, the disruption.
Don't leave me.
The doors banging and all that sort of thing, and crash bang. But it's partly because I don't want to get up at 5 in the morning. So I do start, if I'm writing, if I'm writing one of the travel books, it's very disciplined, because I know that the book has to come out with the series. The series is in the autumn. The book has to be delivered by June. I have to start in March. I work out exactly how many words I have to deliver per week, and I try and keep that up.
And how many words can you do in a week?
Oh, well, I mean, with the book, I could, if I wanted to, do 20,000 words. One week I did at the end. It was just, but that's absolutely the tops. I wouldn't say. Usually about 6,000, 7,000 a week.
So that'll be about 1,500 to 2,000 a day, something like that. I'm sorry if this is boring to you, but I mean, I find these things fascinating. And how many?
I find it interesting.
How many hours can you actually write for per day, in that concentrated way?
Well, I mean, I sit at my desk about 9 o'clock, and I start writing then, and I carry on. And with the novel, which I did a second novel last year, that's very, very different. That's a really completely different process, because with the travel books, I've got a lot of diary stuff, I've got the material. the difficult thing is, how do you make it interesting? How do you make it exciting? How do you select the various stories? How do you get the facts right? You know, what's the word for this in this country? What's the length of this lake you've sailed down? All that, you've got to get those kind of facts. With the novel, you just sit there, and some days just nothing happens. Nothing happens at all. You've got these characters, you've got the story, and you sit there and you think, why? What am I doing? And I was writing my first novel, Hemingway's Chair, one morning, and I'd taken a flat away from the house, which was just completely unfurnished, just had things on the wall related to the book. And nothing would happen. And I was at the window one day, and I saw this telecom van draw up. And they sort of put a little screen round and pull the manhole up, and the guys got in. There were lots of wires and all that. And it took them an hour, and they took the screen down, put it in the van, off they went. I thought, wow, wonderful. In 1 hour they've done an hour's work, and I can do nothing. Because I'm stuck with these characters who don't want to go anywhere or say anything. They don't want to fall in love. They don't want to kill each other. They're just stuck. And here are these guys doing a job of work. And I found that really kind of that nearly sends you a bit mad, I think. I suppose none of all novelists are like that. And then, around about 5 o'clock, just when you're about to pack up, you get on stream, and in an hour or another hour and a half, you can really, it all makes sense, and you push on. But I used to there are lots of writers who give advice on writing, and Hemingway and Isherwood and people like that. They all say, do something. There's a great quote from Isherwood. It's got to be every day, just get after it. And Hemingway says the same. Whatever you write, just the very act of writing something will help, and the next day will be better.
You just have to get your bum on the seat at 9 and start doing it. And also probably to recognise as well that those periods of nothing happening are a key part of the creative process.
Yeah. Funnily enough, in the second novel, The Truth, I actually wrote the character looks out of a window one day, and he looks at these telephone men coming along and making a hole in the road. So I used it.
Nothing's wasted. Well,
Nothing wasted.
Brazil is on sale after the talk, and so is The Truth, and so are the first 2 volumes of Michael Starr's, and the third volume is coming out
in September.
In September,
Yeah.
We now have about 10 or 15 minutes for some questions. Well, can we have a quick round of applause? Thank you so much. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions from you guys, and then there'll be the chance to line up and buy books at the back of the bookstall at about 8:30. So could someone, we're going to have this, I should have put a ringer in. There's always that awkward moment when no one, oh, there's a hand over there, yeah. And can we have the radio mic in the audience? The question would be at the very furthest point.
Yes,
from where Bobby is.
Anyone in the front row, much better. Yeah.
Have we got a question? We're trying to pack them in, sir, so please hurry.
1, 2, 3. Oh.
And make your questions quite quick. We don't really want to hear about you and your life or anything.
Fine. In Life of Brian, when you decided to have the spaceship in there, suddenly coming through.
Yes.
Was that a subversive moment, or was it a historical moment?
No, it was to give Terry Gilliam some work, because he wasn't actually quite as involved as he was in the Holy Grail. I think that really was part of it. He wanted to go off and make a little film of his own, and it was a subversive moment, I suppose, what Terry would say. But that's why it was there.
Thank you.
Bobby? Oh, is there another one up there?
Just get up and shout. We can probably hear.
If you want to ask questions, stand up, start shouting.
Yes.
Shout your question, don't shout something irrelevant.
I want to know how much of you was in your character in GBH.
Oh, how much of me was in my character in GBH? Yeah, I suppose I am, really. I mean, you've got some of you in everything that you do, I think. It certainly wasn't deliberate. And that's the way bits of your own characters slip in, really. And I discussed, it was written by Bleasdale, and Alan, it was partly Alan being a teacher himself. Alan had a fear of bridges. He had all sorts of phobias and worries and anxieties, which is what, that my character had to have as well. But I couldn't be Alan. I just couldn't do Alan, nor did he want me to be Alan. And there were lots of Liverpudlian little wisecracks that I couldn't deliver particularly well. So I had to tailor it, I suppose, to something that was true to the character as it was written, but had perhaps a little more of myself in it. But there was one scene where I had to have a breakdown, and they're all terribly impressed about that, and they cut it out in the end. It was so realistic.
So dark.
What?
But you haven't yourself had a breakdown, have you, or been depressed ever?
No, not for long, no. But so, yes, there probably were things there, but it wasn't deliberate, certainly.
You, sir?
You're 71 now, and so you've come a long way since you were 5, playing Martha Cratchit, or entertaining your mother, doing Shakespearean roles. But is there any possibility you might want to take on a serious theatrical Shakespearean role at some time in the future?
Well, this goes back to what we've been talking about. Yeah, I could do. I quite enjoy acting. For a long time, I was sidetracked into travelling. And the great joy of making the travel programmes, I found, was not just the travel and seeing the world and meeting people and all that. It was working with a very small team of people. Absolutely everyone was involved every single minute of the day. As soon as we got up to the end of the evening, everyone, the sound, the camera, we all had to work flat out. Everyone, it was very demanding work. And I really, really enjoyed that. By the end of the evening, you felt exhausted but exhilarated. You got through this thing. Whereas with acting, certainly film acting and all that, and I'd done a fair bit of that, there's a lot of waiting around. And you really are a cog in a great big machine. And you are called at 6 in the morning, but you're not used till 4 in the afternoon sometimes. And that wears you down. So for a while, I wasn't really looking for doing any acting. But earlier this year, I received a very good script called Remember Me by a lady called Gwyneth Hughes. It's a modern ghost story set in Yorkshire, and which they wanted me to play the central character. And I accepted that. I suddenly felt, well, this is a really good script, and I think I could do it, and it'd be a challenge. And there I was, being called at 6 o'clock in the morning and sitting in my caravan till 4 in the afternoon. Not quite as bad as that, but there was that element to it. But I did enjoy the acting part of it. And now, 1 or 2 people have been asking me the perennial thing, will I go and do some stage work? I keep getting asked, but people do ask, would you do stage work? And I don't know, that's partly you need a lot of bottles, especially to do Shakespeare, all those words. But also, it's a completely different way of life. You work in the evenings, and it's completely different to the way I've organised my life. And also, it would mean, I've been offered something for next year, an Alan Bennett revival, and it would mean like 9 months or something like that. And so you'd have to decide if you're going to do it. That's 9 months a year when you can't go travelling, you can't just go off and write a book. And I've had a lot of freedom, really. So it's a rather convoluted way of saying, yeah, I would like to do some acting, and I'm not sure whether I could really make the leap to doing a long-term stage role. But I would never dismiss it.
Could I just ask another question about a friend of yours who I met? I got an email from the BBC, and they said Michael Palin would like you to go and wander around Sheffield for a day, being a flaneur, doing nothing. So I'm hugely flattered, and thank you for asking me. And the third member of our little group of flaneurs, surprisingly but charmingly, was Peter Stringfellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of after the thing was all over, he sent me a VIP gold card to Stringfellows.
Yeah.
I have not been yet, but I was wondering if you'd like to know. Maybe we should go. Since then, in my mind, I've been wondering. How did Michael Palin become friends with Peter Stringfellow?
Well,
does he go to Stringfellows with John Cleese? At the end of a working day to wind down. How did this all happen? There's a Sheffield connection.
It's a most serendipitous thing, and it's a lovely sort of just an example of why hanging loose a bit, not being too confined to one particular group, one particular idea can work. I was at Brasenose College at Oxford. We had to organise a college ball, a friend of mine and I. Everyone at that time was looking to get the Rolling Stones, to play at the ball. And of course, we couldn't afford it. So people were looking for alternative bands. And I was in Sheffield, and I'd heard of a band called the Sheffields. And they were managed by Peter Stringfellow and his brother. So I went along and said, look, can we do a deal? Could the Sheffields come and play at Brasenose College Ball? And he said yes, and they came along, and they were absolutely terrific. R&B band. They broke up almost immediately afterwards, I think. But they were fantastic. That end of story. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've taken a villa in Mallorca for a week to go there with my son and his wife and our 2 grandsons and my wife. It's a lovely thing we do. I was at Mallorca airport on the way back, thinking, oh dear, holiday's over, and there was a rather sad-looking bloke, very, very pale, sitting at a table on his own. It was Peter Stringfellow. So I went along and I said, hello, Peter.
Very pale?
He looked for a bit like that. Very pale, yes, not a sun worshipper, but anyway, looked a bit like... And then he suddenly said, oh, Michael, hello. And I said, I've never really thanked you for providing the Sheffields. What happened to them? So we fell to talking about the Sheffields. And he loved that. It was not to do with his club or anything like that. But he had a rather engaging way of talking about Sheffield. So when I decided to do the item about flaneurs, because, I was able to be a guest editor of a Today programme, because I wasn't doing lots of other things, so it was a nice thing to be able to do. I suggested you, because you know all about flaneurs. That's what the idler sort of, is a kind of idler kind of character. The person who just looks around and has a good time, sits at cafes and all that. Not a good time, but sits at cafes. So we decided to go to Sheffield. And then, oh yes, Sheffield connection. Get Peter along. So it was you and me and Peter. It was rather a wonderful combination, wasn't it?
It was a very lovely day out.
He became quite emotional, didn't he, at one point? Mind you, since then, he hasn't sent me a gold card. But... I did see him in the street the other day, and he said, when you're coming to the club. I said, I'll come in a moment, yeah. My wife's strange. She's not Puritanic in any shape or form, but she doesn't think it's a particularly good idea for me to go to Stringfellows. That's not my sort of thing.
So,
really.
so we're not going to go out there later?
No,
then,
well,
yeah.
We can discuss it.
Okay, a couple more questions from the
odd
audience.
to me.
Yes, sir?
Is it true that there was an alternative ending to the Holy Grail, where the brave knights, having galloped many leagues and faced many dangers, came finally to that place where the Grail might be found, and that place was called Harrods?
Oh yes, Harrods. Yeah, I can't quite remember. I mean, it might have been. Yes, yeah. No, that's interesting. I can never remember quite why we end things, and ending things are quite difficult and all that, why we put things in, why we don't put things in. And it probably would have been funnier than the ending, although I quite like the police, the modern police coming in. But it was rather like the, in Life of Brian, when we were, sorry, this is slightly going off, but things that weren't in the film, we were discussing how you do it and how you write a film about the life of Christ and all that, and that particular time. And we had some rather nice ideas came up that we couldn't eventually use. I mean, one of them was disciples ringing up to book a table for the Last Supper. And, they say, well, we can't do 12, but we can do you 3 tables of 4. Or we can do 12 at lunchtime. Okay, we'll have 12 at lunchtime. Oh, there is one other thing. We all want to be on the same side. Oh, well, no. It was all about putting tables together. I mean, it's good fun, very fun. We laughed a lot at that, we still do, but it just wasn't right for the film. If we put that in the film, that would have been, kind of just having jokes about Jesus, which wasn't quite what the film was about.
Any more?
Accepting that the life of Brian is sort of more of an attack on dogma and sort of zealotry rather than anything to do with religion. If you were to transpose yourselves to today, would you look to make something like the life of Brian today, and would you actually be willing to tackle sort of wider sort of religious and sort of historical religious stories and targets?
Well, no, probably we wouldn't do the life of Muhammad, I don't think. Not without flak jackets. But, I mean, it's interesting, really, and I have to be honest. Life of Brian was a comedy film. That's primarily what it is. How can we make people laugh for 90 minutes? We worked with the Grail because we created this kind of... the story of the Grail is fairly amorphous, and we can just use it as a narrative, and lots of things can happen. What other kind of story is there? Well, there's the Bible story. And, I mean, I think that was the way we first approached it. There's a certain period, a certain feel to it, certain things happened. How can we make as many people laugh as often as possible in a film? So that was the primary thing that we were doing. It wasn't really a brave attempt to take on the religious establishment and show them how wrong they were and how awful they were and all that sort of thing. We came out with this a bit later on because we sort of needed to have some justification for doing it. But I think you do have to remember that it was primarily a comedy film. I think nowadays it'd be very tricky because people... when we did Life around 1978, it was a brief lull in between times when people killed each other because of their religion. People weren't killing each other much then. Now they are. You see it all the time, Sunnis and Shias or whatever, and previously it'd be Nazis and Jews or whatever it was. It's just not really a comedy subject, and we were able to just use that sort of slight period where we could use religion as the basis of or the religious, or the story that we're all told about the Bible as a basis for comedy about human behavior. And that's really what it is. It's just like all the Python stuff, it's about the sort of the characters in it. So it's about the Roman centurion who has terrible doubts about what he's doing but has to do it anyway. It's the cheery Cockney who says, no, it's a desert island really, and all that sort of thing. It's about people who can't hear. Blessed are the what? Blessed are the cheesemakers, I think he said. So that's what it's about, really. It's not really taking apart the dogma of religion.
Are there any TV comedies that are around now, contemporary ones that stand out for you, that make you laugh?
Well, I mean, there are certain things that make me laugh. I mean, it's a technique they use. Certainly, The Thick of It, and particularly 2012. I thought a wonderful bit of observation, marvelous. Not just the acting, but the script, the way people speak now in committees, the way they say nothing. And in a very convoluted way.
It's about language, really.
Yeah, it's very good idler stuff. They were just showing what's wrong, and W1A I thought was good, but I quite like sketch shows, and I like sketches, and I'm very glad that the Fast Show, which I'm very fond of, is coming back on Friday. Yeah, I think they're good.
We've got time, I think, for one more question. So it's got to be a really good, interesting, intelligent, witty, funny question.
The question.
Would anyone like to ask that?
Hi, I'm right at the back. I like the idea of, with the creative process, the periods when you're doing nothing is part of that process, but when I'm trying to achieve something and I'm not doing anything, it's because I'm reading all of the articles on The Guardian or I'm on Facebook. So that's not contributing to my creative process. So I'm wondering whether, firstly, you procrastinate, And if you do, what are you doing when you're procrastinating? Because my mother here has had all of the games on her computer deleted for that reason. So I'm just wondering coping mechanisms as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is a whole huge thing we get into. Procrastination is just fantastic because it's very close to just dreaming. It's very close to just staring into the, the world around you, which I think is terribly, terribly important. And it's the whole feeling nowadays, you've got to be doing something all the time, right on the phone, or you're looking at this, or you're checking what procrastination means, on the website and all that. Just sit there and look at it all, and it starts to rain, and you get wet, and you go indoors, and you sit somewhere else, and you see someone over in the cafe doing something rather strange, you take that in and all that. I mean, I just love watching the world go by. I think it's very, very important. So I think procrastination is a very good thing, and you can do it, you can practice it very easily. And like airports, I travel, I go through airports and all that, and I mean, they are pretty awful places to go, but there's always something to see. There's always kind of behaviour. I love seeing the behaviour of people in airports, even if it's just people who are sort of doing that all the time. And another thing I've seen recently, which fascinates me, which is couples who go out together, and they sit at a table, and they each have a laptop, and they're just doing, are they talking to each other by the laptop? Or are they doing something completely different? I mean, they don't even look at each other. They're just doing their thing. I think that's kind of really weird. What worries me is, what is everybody talking about, for God's sake? Why are they holding the phone? They go down the street. That has to be said. The great thing about going down the street is you catch someone's eye or something like that, or you see somebody, it's an accidental moment and all that. But now, no, it's like, I sometimes feel that people know the end of the world is nigh, and I don't. And they're all ringing up to say, we've got 4 more minutes, okay? How many? Have you got 4 more minutes? No minutes.
3.5 minutes over time.
Oh my God.
I'm really sorry.
But the world hasn't ended, that's the main thing. Or has it?
But that's a lovely way to end. And can we have a lovely round of applause?